I'm Paul Jacobs, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Paul, thank you so much for being on the show. We've wanted to have you on for a very long time. I'm excited to hear a little bit about your life in music, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So I wanted to start out by asking about one of the many things that you're known for, and these are the marathon concerts that you perform. I read about one being 18 hours long, and you perform the complete works of a given composer, Messiaen, Bach. How is that even possible? First of all, an 18-hour concert.
Well, I was younger then. I haven't done one of these in a few years, but I did play the complete organ works of Bach in an 18-hour concert when I was 23, and it was right around the 250th anniversary of Bach's death in Leipzig in 1750. And I just recall starting at 6 a.m. and continuing through about 12:18, I think the clock stopped. But the music was really the sustenance for me that day. I had nothing but a cup of chocolate pudding to eat and lots of water here and there.
Well, an 18-hour concert, what kind of audience do you expect at such an event, if any?
Well, luckily Bach is a real draw, so we had people filtering in and out throughout the day. A few people actually stayed for the duration of the performance, and I think just the sensational aspect of this marathon elicited a lot of interest and lured people to hear this music that might not have ordinarily considered it.
What compelled you to even do it?
Well, certainly the music of Bach. Bach is perhaps my very favorite composer. I can continue to draw spiritual nourishment from his work, and he inspires me daily. And he was an organist. That was his instrument. Perhaps he most closely associated his virtuosity with the organ, and gave great music.
On the other hand, putting all of his works in one concert, that also seems to be a bit of a sporting event.
Yeah.
Are there certain advantages to putting everything in one event?
Well, I guess just to be able to experience Bach's development. I didn't play the music chronologically, but I wanted to give a sense of variety in 14 segments, as it were. And each segment featured just different genres of Bach's organ writing, shorter pieces, larger preludes and fugues, trio sonatas, concerti, etc. So you got a good sampling and variety throughout the day.
Now, the other question I had about these concerts is, I do happen to know that you've committed to memory all of the works of Bach. Are there certain advantages, in your view, to performing from memory? Is it better?
I think so. Memorization is perhaps a component that's not always been expected of organists for various reasons, not least of which is the nature of our instrument. No two organs are alike. They vary dramatically sometimes, and organists have to think about a lot of non-musical aspects when they're playing, and that could be a distraction. So when we memorize music, organists have to memorize a very intricate and invisible matrix of pistons and stop pulling and positions of the swell boxes and all of these other things, in addition to the notes, in addition to the music.
Were you always good with your memory? Obviously, you had to have been quite fast with learning. But my question is, on a practical level, let's say that there is an organ student out there who also wants to commit to memory all the works of Bach or Messiaen. How on earth do you not put your whole life on hold? You have to make a living, you have to teach in your case. How do you find time to memorize that sheer volume of music?
Well, you really have to make the time. It is a complete immersion, and you have to sacrifice a lot, sleep included. But the music itself is what spurs you on. If you're excited and animated by the music, that's going to give you the energy that you need. And of course, to get help from a teacher and perform a lot whenever you can. And there are a lot of pitfalls along the way and little snags that come up and frustrations, but that's life, and you just keep going.
So let's talk about the instruments that you mentioned. Each organ is so different, and for the layperson who's watching our show, they probably don't realize how different they can be. What I'm wondering is, how can an organist find an individual voice that's recognizable, or can you find your own individual voice on a new instrument and replicate it there on something that you've just encountered?
Very much so. That's a good question. It's a very personal aspect of organ playing, choosing registrations, the different sounds, the colors available to an organist that vary from one instrument to the next. And generally, composers either don't indicate that in the score, they'll just give you a dynamic marking, and the organist is responsible for filling in the blanks. Or even if the composer does specify in a score which sounds to use, which stops to pull, it might not work on a certain instrument, and the organist then has to use imagination and find what works, what best communicates the music.
Now, is finding an individual voice for an organist, is that something that just comes through experience, or is that something that's fostered? For example, is that something that you try to help your students with?
Well, I think it's something that is inevitable if one's going about it the right way. If you try too hard to find your own voice, then perhaps it's not going to seem as genuine or as authentic. But I think the first thing that needs to happen with anyone pursuing an art form or a tradition that spans hundreds of years is you have to familiarize yourself with the way it was done before your time. And you think of painters who copied the work of previous masters. You think of Bach and all the early composers copying manuscripts to familiarize themselves with the style. And I think musicians also, we listen to recordings, and sometimes we like what we hear, and we think, my goodness, I want to do that. Especially when you're younger, you copy a bit more, and I think that is okay. And then gradually, you begin to develop your own voice.
Was there a point at which you recognized within yourself that you had found something that was authentic to you?
Well, yes. You know, I think sometimes the organ profession, organists can be a little too academic in how they approach their instrument. I mean, even to this day, I think many organists, they view the academy, you know, the teaching as the ultimate thing one can do with life, as opposed to performing. Now, there's nothing wrong with teaching. I do it, and it's very important to me. But you know, ultimately, an art form is supposed to be shared and expressed not just with other organists, if you're an organist, but with a general public eager to experience your work. And I always want to play for the average audience, just general music lovers, and connect with them. That's very important to me.
Okay, so cutting right to the chase, what do you see your role in this world as a musician, as an organist?
Well, I think that there are different dimensions of what I want to do with my work and try to do, not least of which is to build a bridge from the organ world into the broader world of classical music. Because sometimes organists are very insular, isolated from what goes on in the bigger picture. And I work a lot with orchestras, of course, as well as other classical musicians. So that's something that I think is very important. But also just to connect with human hearts in the audience and in the world in any way that you possibly can, because I think that people crave beauty, and they crave these experiences, artistic experiences. They want to be moved, they want to be stirred. So above all else, as a musician, that's what I see as my goal.
Do you find that there are any surprising audience reactions in terms of people who come to you saying that I didn't have the reaction that I expected to the pipe organ as opposed to another instrument? It wasn't what I expected.
Oh, very much so. This is something that I hear frequently, and I take as a compliment when people say that they've had a revelation. They've not experienced the organ in a certain way, or didn't know that organ music could be so expressive and so moving. And I, like many organists, begin as a pianist, and I'm very familiar with the great piano literature. It's something that I studied in my formative years, and I know what it means to play the piano and what audiences generally expect when they hear beautiful music making on the instrument, and I want the same thing to occur for organ.
So you started out on the piano. What compelled you to switch over to the pipe organ?
Well, I guess that's a bit mysterious. I think above all else, the music itself, but the instrument. I started piano when I was about 5, and then it was in church that I became fixated on the great organ in the back of the church, and would work my way up into the gallery and watch the organist play the postlude each week. And when I was tall enough to reach the pedals, I would play the instrument, and gradually would take over and studied the instrument. But I remember just being enamored with the complexity of the instrument as well, all the wind lines and the thousands of pipes, different shapes, the color palette available on the instrument. We had an organist, I remember as a boy hearing play a work by Jean Langlais, the 20th century French composer, a piece of his Chant de Joie, Song of Joy, and it absolutely captivated me. I never heard any sounds like that before at that point in my life. And it was joyful, it was terrifying, it was marvelous. It excited me, and I knew I wanted to draw closer to this, whatever it was.
Okay, so Paul, I have the impression from everything you've done that things happened rather quickly for you. At the age of 15, you received your first appointment as the principal organist at a church. What does that even entail for a 15-year-old boy, really?
Yeah, well, I had to grow up fast. I remember playing for many brides and grooms, their weddings, and consulting with them on the music, and I was 15, and then I had a lot of obligations on the weekends, but that's what I wanted to do. I was never particularly good at athletic endeavors. So music was the thing that I was all about, and I just threw myself into it completely.
Was there any doubt that this would be your life? Did you know that going in, or this was just the natural path? You just said, let's see where this goes.
There was never a doubt. In a way, I had the advantage of growing up in a non-musical family, in the sense that I think I understand those people who might not have much exposure to classical music. And I think I know, or at least have a better understanding maybe of how to communicate and work with those people that don't know much about music. My own family, they were very supportive, and I was fortunate in a small town in Pennsylvania to have first-rate mentors, a piano teacher and an organ teacher who remain dear friends of mine. And I think the mentorship is very important. Having those people lead you in the right direction in those early years is crucial.
But I'm trying to get a sense of, really, when you got that job at 15, could you have pictured that you would be teaching here at Juilliard? Could you have envisioned that you were traveling around the world as a touring organist? Did you even know that that existed?
That's a good question. No, I can't say that I did. At that point, and I was unaware of all of these dreams that one could have and pursue them. It really wasn't until my undergraduate years at Curtis that I began to see that bigger picture, that more vast horizon. But the love of music and the calling, the vocation, as it were, that was never a question.
I've had many organist friends who know that they love the instrument, they wish that this would be the central aspect of their lives, but they are unsure of how they can do it. I, as a pianist, can speak to the fact that the piano world is roughly divided into two circuits. You either go into academia and you get a teaching job and that's the basis of your living, or, and perhaps there's some overlap, but you can also do the competition route and hopefully find some performance opportunities. Some people manage to bypass that as well. What do the routes in the life of an organist typically look like?
I would love to see young organists possess a more ambition to trailblaze, to find other opportunities, because what I fear is that young organists tend to be encouraged and then they graduate, and there are some very interesting international organ competitions that occur. They go through those, that run that circuit until the age limit of 30 or what have you, and then they drift into oblivion, even if they win those competitions. And I would love to see young organists be lit with a flame to insist that their art form be taken every bit as seriously as a pianist or a violinist or a singer, and to just do anything you can to make it happen. I think there are tremendous opportunities that are just waiting to be discovered.
But do you think that that can actually be fostered? Or is that innate?
Oh no, I think that, well, I think it's probably both.
Right.
I look at my students at Juilliard, and these are things that we talk about regularly. You know, what can you do? And some of them, yes, they already have that fire lit underneath them, and they're going to do it. And you can see just in how they work with composers, and they collaborate with other musicians, or they're just thinking outside of the usual parameters that have been placed before us. I think that this needs to happen much more so. And I should also say that, you know, there's some that will say the organ needs to, we need to get the organ out of the church and into the concert hall. I don't want to take the organ out of the church, but I do want to bring the organ into the concert hall and have it heard. I don't think it's one or the other. And fortunately, there is now more organ music in secular venues, and that's very good, but that shouldn't diminish the role that it has played in a sacred environment for centuries.
Do you feel like there's something missing from the standard curriculum? Do you feel like there are certain things that you encourage your students to do, perhaps even outside of music, to become a well-rounded musician?
I look at what our society values, and I would say that we value the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. This is where money is to be made. This is where you know, you can develop that living, that livelihood, make some money. But with a musician, it's not so clear. The path is not so clear, and we live in a time that I would say doesn't value music education. It's been siphoned out of the schools, and so there's a huge burden placed upon young musicians not only to perform well, but they have to wear additional hats. They have to teach in addition to perform and engage in constant outreach, which I think is necessary and important. I understand why the stress can be overwhelming, because there are no guarantees, and even with our own work, perfection is never achieved. We work and work and work and work, and then sometimes we perform and it doesn't go well, and it's not fair. It certainly isn't sometimes. But, you know, again, I've always believed that if you're animated by the right source, the spiritual source, and turn to other art forms. I happen to love painting. I mean, as an organist, architecture. I was just down at the Bach Festival at Rollins College, and didn't realize that was a Ralph Adams Cram building, the chapel. I mean, this is a great American architect. The history, and to derive inspiration and see that we're not alone in this, and not to view the work that we do in classical music as autonomous and separate, but in a much bigger picture.
You've already achieved so much in your young life. Did success always seem assured for you, or did you ever experience those same anxieties that other people might?
Well, you know, it's funny, I've never thought of it that way. I always look at what I can't do, and when I'm by myself, I think, my goodness sake, all of these limitations and my own weaknesses and frailties. I'm not sure that my lifestyle is all that glamorous, and that's not really what I've been after. But I look at dreams unrealized and things that haven't happened yet. It's not that I'm down in the dumps and dwell on that exclusively. No. But what I'm trying to say is it's not been an easy ride for me either. And I guess you're right. Some people would look at classical musicians who have achieved a certain status and they think, my goodness, if I could just get to that level, I would be so much happier. I would feel so much more fulfilled. Well, yes, the art fulfills you, but I'm not sure that you ever are fully satisfied. You know, there are no easy answers to this. And I would just say that the individual has to do a lot of soul searching, but recognize in all of that the humanity that is supposed to be attached to, I think, the work that we are doing. That is to say, dealing with the human spirit, that I think is something that is neglected too much in our time, the human spirit. And we see, you know, right before us all of the problems, the drug problems, the depression, the anxiety, the suicide that is rampant in our time.
Probably even within the musicians community as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's an existential vacuum. It's not something that medicine or the biological or the physiological, it can't just be addressed that way. We've got to be willing to talk about, maybe look backward into the past, and how did the past define the human spirit? How did they deal with these problems? I mean, great artists, they somehow magically transform their pains and anxieties and sorrows into something beautiful. And that is a miracle. We can turn to this when we feel down and when we feel completely disillusioned, disenfranchised. We can always return to it.
Did you ever have to yourself experience that level of soul searching that you just described? I know that my life feels like that's the nonstop form of existence, really.
Yes. Yeah, oh my, I think that that's probably how I feel most of the time. But I never doubt that I'm doing what I need to do. And I think this is what I would ask a young musician to consider. Is there any doubt? I mean, of course we have questions from time to time, but how committed are you? Could you possibly do anything else with your life? You know, maybe you could do something else and still be involved in music. You know, you have to think, we do have to make a living, we have to eat, we have to pay rent, we have these practical, mundane concerns.
But what would it even look like for you in speaking about, as of yet, unrealized dreams? You've won the Grammy, you teach at Juilliard, you tour around the world with all the world's great orchestras. What would doing more even look like? What are your unrealized dreams at this point?
Well, I think I think spiritually for myself, you know, we never cease to grow in our art, and I think of how I approach music now, how I play. Let's just take this very basic example. I can't imagine how I played Bach when I was a student. I can't even imagine. And I have some old recordings, and when I listen to them, I'm horrified, because I think, oh my goodness, I didn't know what I was doing. And now I hear music so much more completely. And this is a constant journey. a constant search to carry this music into the decades to come, and I hope to, on some level, deepen my own relationship with this music, and to be able to share it, just to continue to broaden the audience for my art form, which is often hidden, often kind of buried, and to be able to do that, that's, I think, going to be a life's work, and to inspire students to do that.
What do you count as the most fulfilling experiences that you say, this is why I do it?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I would say that some of the most powerful moments that I've experienced with music, with my art, are not when I am before an audience. Because when I'm before an audience, experiences that I've had, I've been brought to tears in a few instances, depending on what's gone on in my life at a certain time, by the music. In fact, I remember specifically years ago, I was playing, preparing for a program at Disney Hall, Bach's third part of the Klavierbund. And I was in the middle of my practice, and I was exhausted, and a lot of other things were going on in life. And I came to one of his settings of the Austiffernote, which is a 6-part counterpoint, one of the few examples in Bach of 6-part counterpoint, double pedaling. It's an astonishing work. The other one, of course, is the Musical Offering, yes. Richard Carr. And this is the other one.
Yes.
And I don't know what happened, but I was so overwhelmed with that piece, the beauty of it. It was miraculous. And I was moved to tears. I don't know why it happened at that point exactly, but that's happened something similar to that in other instances, but always when I'm alone. You know, it doesn't happen when I'm before an audience. Not to say that I'm not engaged, of course I am. But those moments just prove everything to be worthwhile. And we want everyone. I think, with this music, everyone in the world should hear this or experience this. And anything short of that is inadequate. And I've always believed, and I don't think we think about this enough today, but I've always believed that there is a timeless aspect to great music. It's not married to the spirit of an age. In fact, the old saying that, you know, he who marries the spirit of an age winds up a widow in the next. But I believe that the best music transcends all this, and I like the word sublime, because, you know, centuries ago there was a distinction made between beautiful and sublime. Of course, we all love beauty, but sublimity is something profound. It's something that can be even a bit terrifying, but yet you're drawn to the beauty, the intensity of the experience, no less.
How do you handle those days where you do feel like nerves are more of an issue? I know that organists, in some cases, are facing away from the audience. Does that make you forget that that's even going on?
Well, yes, and I suppose it could, but I like to be able to have the organ angled and such so that there is a profile. The human face is the most expressive part of the human body, and you think, of course, of singers connecting so immediately. And even conductors can be physically more animated even though their back is showing, but organists have that disadvantage. So sometimes just angling the console, if it's a movable console, a certain way, it gives a more intimate relationship with the audience.
Do you have a favorite memory on stage that stands out in your mind? I know I can think of a couple in my case as a pianist. Is there one for you?
Well, I'm sure if I really thought about it, I can't say there's anything in particular, though I recall performing in Houston and playing a very serene work of Messiaen, and finally arrived at the last chord and was getting ready to release it very gently, and noticed on my right knee there was a large wasp just waiting to go for it. So that was quite a, maybe it's not my favorite moment on stage. Don't include that.
Yeah.
I can't.
But I'm curious about that sort of thing, because I remember certain instances where I was going to sneeze, or someone in the audience did a huge, very obvious sneeze, and I would have to try not to laugh. It's just, these things do stand out. But do you have a favorite Do you have a favorite musical memory?
Oh, goodness. I'm not sure.
Do you think that one of these marathon concerts would count within this? Maybe that was within one day a personal journey for you?
Okay, I think I know what I could say on that. Yes, I think not all music demands applause, or maybe it's not even desirable. And there have been a few performances, depending on the literature of the music, that I've asked the audience not to clap, including after a massive work of Messiaen, his Livre du Saint-Sacrement, the Book of the Holy Sacrament. And you know, you go through an hour and 40 minutes of music and arrive on these 7 fortissimo chords that one organist referred to the gates of heaven opening up. And my sense is, and then there's a plunge right down to the low C of the organ, the lowest note, the lowest frequency that just rattles. I don't think any applause is warranted after that. And I asked the audience at the beginning, let's just depart in silence.
For the many audience members who have never been to an organ concert, what do you hope that they will bring of themselves to the experience of being there?
I hope that wherever one is in music, whether one is very knowledgeable and educated in music or one knows very little about it, deepen your understanding of it, even if it's just going to the computer and deepening your knowledge of music. This is what we're missing today, a lack of curiosity in the past and knowing why something is great. Of course, our personal subjective experience is important, but there's more to it than that. And there's a legacy, there's a cultural inheritance that we need to know about because our lives will be changed forever.
Paul, thank you so much again for being here and for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Awesome. It was fun.
Yes.